The other day, I showed you pictures. I showed you some pictures of a protest. In fact, listen to this. Here it is.
Mr. Greg Bear's house. Mr. Greg Bear is a lobbyist that works for Bank of America.
Bad for America!
Okay. This is SEIU, and they're doing a protest, and the media barely covered this. This is at a guy's house, okay? Now, let me tell you the story. Greg Bear is a dad. He's a banker, but he's a dad. He enjoyed last Sunday afternoon watching his youngest son play in a Little League baseball game. I have to tell you, I was Sunday afternoon playing frisbat with my son Rafe. We play frisbat because I'm better at throwing a bat than I am a baseball. And at one point, my 5-year-old son did the same thing he did with a baseball. He picked up the frisbee and said, "Wow, Dad, you're not really good at this either." I'm not. I didn't play sports as a kid, but I love playing with my son. And I can't wait to do what Greg did on Sunday, watch my son play baseball. Unfortunately for Greg, his day was about to turn for the worse. He was driving home after the game, no doubt talking about the highs and lows of the game with his son. And he was shocked to find out what was waiting for him when he got home. An angry mob of protesters. The protesters surrounding his house, screaming, yelling bloody murder. Greg was horrified. Not only because his younger son was sitting in the car with him. Can you imagine, as a parent, can you turn the audio down, please? As a parent, he was sitting there and his youngest son was in the car, and they pull up to this at his house. Now, can you imagine what your kid is thinking? Can you imagine the fear? Can you imagine what you feel as a parent? Not just because this son is sitting next to you seeing this, but because you realize now that your 14-year-old son is in the home all by himself. These protesters were bussed in. 14 buses filled with 500 people. They poured out of the buses like locusts on this man's property right up to the house. Greg's son, Jack, he's alone in the house. He was so frightened. The mob was yelling, becoming angrier. He didn't know what to do. He went into the bathroom and locked himself in the bathroom and then called his dad's cell phone. Dad, still in the car, is now faced with a decision. What would you do? You've got one young son. You have this surrounding your house. You have another son inside. What do you do? You going to leave this one in the car? Or are you going to take this one with you here? Are you going to leave him in? You're going to call police? What do you do? He called police. Police feared intervention would only incite the crowd even more. Well, now Dad had to make a decision. He didn't have very much time to think. Mobs can turn at any moment. Police are afraid of this mob. So he drove around the corner and parked his car about a block or so away and left his, I would imagine, very frightened 12-year-old son inside, still sitting in the baseball uniform. And then he goes to get his older son out of the house. Now here he is. They're surrounding his house. He's got to take out his key and go into the house. Mob, 500 people. He makes his way through the house. Excuse me, need to get into the house. He said, "I have a child in there who is alone and frightened. Let me pass." They just continued to yell and chant. Can you see yourself in this situation? I hope to God you never do. He eventually got his son out of the house, got back into the car. He now had his 2 boys, and they got the hell out of there. Now, this guy must be a monster, right? Right? Had to be a monster. I mean, what would you do to get 500 mobsters surrounding your house like that? Well, as much as no one deserves this kind of treatment, you leave the families out of it. Here's the excuse. They were from a union. They're from SEIU. And he works at a bank. They claim to be angry because Bear is the Deputy General Counsel for Corporate Law at Bank of America. Yeah, he's one of those evil bank executives. Greedy Bush crony, no doubt. Oh, no, actually, he's a lifelong Democrat who worked for the Clinton Treasury Department. Now he's an evil banker. Get him and the kids. Why not just protest at the office? Do you have to bring it to somebody's front door? Yeah, actually, if you're with SEIU, that's the way things are done now. Watch.
We took names. We watched how they voted. We know where they live.
Intimidation. They can't get you one way, they'll get you another. I'm sure some people at SEIU know exactly what I want to say now, but I won't. After the mob finally packed it in and left, they moved on to another CEO's house, and then another one. You see, SEIU was out on their intimidation tour, and they were completely unapologetic, accusing a reporter who questioned the tactic of getting too emotional on the story. Oh, well, you wouldn't want to get emotional with a 12 and 14-year-old that's frightened out of their mind. No. It's a good thing that there weren't very many reporters there to ask. In fact, I only found two. One was for the Huffington Post and wrote a glorious review of this. And the other one, who was brave enough to say something, was it a Forbes reporter or a Fortune reporter? That's it, Fortune magazine, that's it. Nope, nobody around there to ask any questions. No one asked a question if it's morally reprehensible to do this, or ethically even thinkable. No one to ask the question if anyone was in the house. No one to ask the question about how the family feels today. How are you guys sleeping? How are the kids? How was your son's baseball game? It's forever lost now, isn't it? Your kid's never going to remember that game. The family's never going to remember that game. They'll remember that game. But they'll only remember it this way. Oh yeah, that was the day. That was the day everybody surrounded our house. No one's asking any questions. Why would you surround the house of a lifelong Democrat, a Clinton official? Did he do something? Or is it just that he works for the bank? No reporter is out questioning SEIU, owing a ton of money to Bank of America. Is this an intimidation tactic to try to get them to forgive your loans because you're collapsing on the inside? You need everybody to bail you out? Is that possible? Is this the same tactic that SEIU and Acorn used on the banks that forced them to make the risky loans that got us into this situation? Is it have anything to do with unionizing the tellers at the bank, which you're all trying to do? Oh, there's a million questions, but no reporters. No reporters. Nope, they're working on a movie script. Wag the dog. They're not working on news or news stories anymore. See, to get a news story, you have to ask real questions. You have to actually care. You have to care about the truth. You have to be brave enough to say it. You have to just show up. That's a good start. I wonder what we're turning into. Last night I went to a show here in New York, and it was, I didn't realize this, I showed up in a t-shirt and a pair of jeans with my family, and it was a big gala opening. My wife wasn't real happy with me, not knowing those details. It was an opening of a Cirque du Soleil show, and we were sitting amongst all these celebrities, which I also, if I would have known, I wouldn't have gone, because it's never good with me. But James Gandolfini was sitting right behind me. Right behind me. I'm a fan of James Gandolfini. I like him. I had my 4-year-old daughter and my 5-year-old. My 5-year-old was sitting on my lap. And afterwards, after an intermission, I stood up with my son. He said, "Dad, I got to go potty." And so I stood up, and I was holding him in my arms. And I turned around, and I see Jim, and I said, "Hey, Jim, we have a mutual friend." And I told him and shook his hand, and he said, "What is Satan doing here?" I had my 5-year-old in my arms. I didn't shoot back, why are you glorifying killing mobsters, whoredom? None of that. It didn't even cross my mind, quite honestly. That actually came from a friend of mine today.